The readings were consistent until I slept. That's when the number, as if something needed me unconscious, observed freely. Dr. Marcus Webb stared at the monitor, his bloodshot eyes tracing the graph for the 100th time. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours, a thin film forming on its surface, but he didn't notice. He couldn't look away from the data that defied everything he thought he understood about quantum. The wave function collapse pattern should have been random, chaotic, unpredictable. That was the nature of quantum observation. You looked, the possibilities collapsed into a single reality, and the universe moved on. Clean, simple, consistent, except his weren't. Marcus had been running the double-slit experiment variations for 3 months' private laboratory, a converted warehouse space in the industrial district of Porty. The isolation suited after the university had politely suggested he pursue his unorthodox research interests. Elsewhere, he'd liquidated his retirement fund and set up this sanctuary of stainless steel precision. Here, nobody questioned his method. Nobody interrupted his work with committee meet or peer review concern. Just him, the equipment, and the fundamental mystery of reality. The experiment itself was straightforward, elegant. Even photons fired through barriers, detectors measuring their behavior, thousands of iterations recorded. When observed, particles behaved like particles. When unobserved, they behaved like waves. The observer effect in its purest form. Marcus had calibrated everything, eliminated every possible source of error, and run the tests continuous 24 hours a day for weeks. And that's when he noticed the pattern. During the day, when he was present and alert, monitoring the system, the results aligned perfectly with quantum. The collapse of the wave function occurred exactly with the expected probability. Beautiful text, boring. But at night, while he slept in the small apartment he built in the back corner of the warehouse, something changed. The collapse pattern intensified. The wave functions didn't just collapse. They snapped into definite states with significantly higher consistency. The probability curves sharpened. The quantum indeterminacy it should have persisted showed signs of aggressive resolution, as if reality itself was making more decisive choices when he wasn't watching. At first, Marcus assumed equipment malfunction. He spent 2 weeks checking every connection, recalibrating every sensor, replacing components. The pattern persisted. Then he considered environmental variables, temperature fluctuation, electromagnetic interference from the building's old wiring, vibrations from late-night traffic on the nearby highway. He installed isolation thermal regulated M-shift. The pattern remained unchanged. It was only when he cross-referenced the anomalous readings with his own sleep tracker device he wore to monitor his increasingly erratic rest pattern that the correlation became undeniable. The effect began precisely when he entered REM's. It peaked during his deepest sleep cycle, and it diminished the moment his brain activity indicated awakening, even before open. The implications were staggering, potentially paradigm-shattering, or evidence of his own deteriorating mental state. Marcus rubbed his feeling the rough stubble 3 days growth. When had he last showered? Tuesday, Wednesday. The days had started. Sarah would have scolded. Dr. Sarah, his former research partner, the only colleague who'd taken his theories seriously before the university essentially exited. She'd tried to maintain contact, had called twice last month, but Marcus hadn't answered. How could he explain this to anyone when he barely understood it himself? He pulled up the comparison chart again. Left side, daytime, perfectly normal. Right side, nighttime reading, showing a 37% increase in wave function collapse. 37%. That wasn't error. That was a measurable, repeatable phenomenon that suggested something impossible. The observer effect was inversely correlated with his conscious awareness, as if the universe didn't need him awake, as if something else was watching. He closed. Marcus set down his empty mug, and made. Tonight, he wouldn't sleep. He'd stay awake, monitor the equipment in real time, and see if his presence conscious, alert, presence good, prevent whatever was happening in the dark hours of his unconscious. If the anomaly disappeared, he'd have. If it didn't, he'd have something far more. Proof that observation didn't require at least not a conscience. The first night of vigilance felt like descending to a strange kind of madness. Marcus had prepared carefully, arranging his chair directly in front of the monitor, brewing a full pot of the strongest coffee he could find, even taking a cold shower at sunset to shock his system into alert. He would not blink longer. He would be the conscious observer the experiment demanded, and he would finally see the data behave. By midnight, the readings were perfectly normal. Wave functions collapsed with standard random probability distribution, spread exactly as predicted by quantum. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that the universe still needs sense. Disappointment that his discovery might have been nothing more than an elaborate delusion brought on by isolation exhaustion. By 2 in the morning, his eyes burned. The letters on the screens blurred and doubled. He stood, paced the laboratory, did jumping jack. The coffee had left his mouth tasting like rust and his hands trembling, but his mind felt sharp, razor focused on the street. The readings remained stubbornly, frustrating, normal. By 4, Marcus caught himself staring at nothing, his vision unfocused, his thoughts drifting toward the edges of sleep. He slapped his own face, hard enough to leave a red mark. The sting brought clarity. He checked the monitors again, still perfectly, maddeningly consistent with every text he'd ever read. Dawn broke through the high window of the warehouse, painting everything in shades of gray, and Marcus he'd stayed awake the entire night, and the anomaly had not once. The intensified collapse, the aggressive wave function resolute, the impossible consistent or absent. The data looked exactly as it should when a conscious observer remained present. He should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt hollow, because the correlation was now undone. Whatever was happening in his experiment required his unconscious. It needed him asleep. The question that terrified wasn't what was causing the effect, was what that about the nature of observation itself. Marcus was about to shut down the equipment and finally rest when his phone. The sound startled him so badly he knocked over the remnant of his coffee. Sarah's name glowed on the screen. He considered not answer, but his exhausted judgment failed. Marcus. Her voice carried immediate concern. Are you okay? You sound terrible. I'm fine. Just working. His own voice sounded distant. You haven't answered my calls in weeks. I'm worried, appalled. I'm in Portland for a conference. Can I stop by? Every instinct told him to say no, to protect his work from scrutiny, to avoid the inevitable conversation about his mental state. But another part of the part drowning in isolation desperately needed someone to validate what he experienced. Yes, he said before he could come by this afternoon. After hanging up, Marcus finally allowed himself to look away from the monitor. His laboratory, which had felt like a temple of discovery just months ago, now resembled a cave where a hermit had retreated from equipment scattered across table, papers covered in scribbled equations, empty food containers forming small pyramids in the corner, and him, wild-eyed and unwashed, the mad science from every caution. He needed sleep, but more than that, he needed to understand. Because if the observer effect could function in his absence, it could intensify when he was unconscious. Then everything, physics, understood about measurement and reality might be fundamental, or something was observing in his place. Marcus set up the automated recordings, calibrated them one final time, and made his way to his small apartment. Tonight he would sleep, and tomorrow, when Sarah arrived, he would show her the impossible data and let her tell him whether he was on discovery of a lifetime or losing his mind. Either way, the numbers would tell their story. While Marcus woke to the sound of knocking. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was or what day. The knock came again, more insistent. Sarah. He'd told her to come. He stumbled out of bed, his body aching from the strange sleep he'd finally allowed, and opened the door. Sarah Chen stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she took in his appearance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, her blazer crisp and pressed everything. Marcus no longer. They'd been colleagues once, partners in research, before his theory became too radical, and her pragmatism had kept her employed. Jesus, Marcus, when was the last time you ate something that wasn't? She pushed past him into the laboratory, her scientist's eye immediately cataloging the chaos. This place looks like a crime scene. I've been busy. He closed the door, suddenly self-conscious. The data I need to show you the data. You need to show me a shower first. But her tone softened. I'm serious, Marcus. You look like you haven't slept in days. I haven't, not until last night. That's part of what I need to show you. He moved to the monitoring station, pulling up the comparison files he'd prepared. Look at this. These are readings from when I'm awake and present. Standard quantum behavior, right. Wave function, collapse. Probability distribution, everything text. Sarah leaned in, her trained eyes scanning. Okay, so far, nothing unusual. Now, Marcus pulled up the nighttime data. Same experiment, same equipment, same, except these were recorded while I was. The difference was immediately visible. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, her finger tracing the elevated collapse. Consistent. That's a significant deviation. 37% in wave collapse. Repeatable. Measurable. Correlate directly with my REM sleep. Marcus pulled up another screen, showing his biometric data overlaid with the quantum. See, the moment I enter deep sleep, the effect begins. The moment I wake, it stops. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind working through the implication. You've checked for equipment error extensively, recalibrated everything. Environmental variable, isolated control, observer bias in the data. I ran blind analysis, the pattern hold. Marcus could hear the desperation creeping. Sarah, I'm not crazy. The numbers don't lie. She turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. I'm not saying you're crazy. I'm saying this is impossible. The observer effect requires conscious observation. That's fundamental to Copenhagen interpret to quantum mechanic itself. If what you're showing me is real, it suggests. She trailed off, unwilling to finish. It suggests observation doesn't require conscious, or that something else is observing. Marcus said what they were both thinking. I stayed awake all last night. The anomaly disappeared completely. My present, my conscious awareness somehow suppresses the effect. That's backward. That's completely backward from how it should. Sarah started pacing, the way she always did when confronted with a theoretical. Unless, what if you're not suppressing? What if your conscious mind is just noisy, less efficient at observing? The suggestion hit Marcus like cold. He hadn't considered that angle. You're saying my unconscious state is a better observer than my conscious. I'm saying maybe consciousness isn't the variable you think it. Maybe awareness exists on a spectrum, and sleep accesses something more fundamental. Sarah stopped pacing, her scientific excitement briefly overriding. Have you tried partial sleep meditation? Anything between fully conscious? Marcus shook his. I've been too afraid to sleep until last. I thought I was losing. You might be on to something instead. Sarah pulled out her phone, already taking. We need more data. Controlled condition. Maybe EEG monitor to track your brain states more precisely. If we can map exactly when the effect, there's something. Marcus, his voice. Last night, after I checked my notebook, There are equations I don't remember. Complex derivation of quantum state calculus. My handwriting. He retrieved the notebook, flipping it open to show her pages of dense mathematical. I don't remember any. And Sarah, these equations, they solve problems I've been stuck on. Sarah took the notebook, her hands trembling slightly as she examined the page, her face pale as she recognized the sophistication of the work. This is graduate level quantum field theory. You wrote this in your sleep, apparently. Marcus felt the familiar tightness chest, the fear that had been building since he'd made discovery. What if whatever is observing my experiment isn't just watching? What if it's also... Sarah spent 3 hours analyzing. She cross-referenced them with Marcus, checked the mathematical logic, even ran some of the calculations through simulation software on her laptop. Every test confirmed the same unsettling. The work was brilliant, sophisticated, and completely beyond what Marcus had demonstrated capability in his waking. I need to send samples to a handwriting analyst, Sarah said finally, closing the note with deliberate, as if it might bite. But Marcus, even if this is your handwriting, the cognitive processes required to produce this level of mathematics during sleep, it's neurologically improbable. The brain doesn't work this way during REM cycle. I know. Marcus had made coffee, proper coffee, and the normalcy of the ritual had steadied, which means either I'm experiencing some kind of savant syndrome that only activates when I'm on, or something is using your hand to write while you... Sarah finished the thought he couldn't quite voice. Do you know how that sounds? Like I've lost my mind. I know. He set down his mug harder than in... But you've seen you've verified equation. At what point do we stop dismissing evidence because it doesn't fit our model of reality? Sarah was quiet, her fingers drumming against the note. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. There's fringe research, mostly dismissed about conscious during sleep. Studies suggesting that the sleeping brain might access information processing pathway, that conscious awareness. Some theories about quantum consciousness. Roger Penrose's work on microtubule neuron, suggesting that consciousness might be a quantum phenomenon itself. You think my brain is quantum entangled with the experiment. Marcus heard the hope and desperation in his own. I think we need to approach this systematically. Sarah stood, her scientific training reasserting. We need continuous monitoring, video surveillance of you while you sleep, coupled with EEG to track your brain, synchronized with your quantum. If there's a correlation between your neural states and the experimental, we'll find it. And if we find that something else is thinking, the question hung between the next month, then we'll have revolutionized our understanding of conscious observation and maybe reality. Sarah met his eye, or we'll have documented a very elaborate breakdown. Either way, we'll have data. They spent the next 2 days installing the monitor equipment, cameras positioned around Marcus's bed, IG, respiratory monitor, even sensors to track his eye moves during REM sleep. Sarah insisted on medical-grade equipment, borrowing it from contacts at the university hospital with vague explanations about sleep. The quantum experiment continued, its automated system recording every... This feels like I'm preparing for my own, Marcus said as Sarah attached the final electrode to his scalp. You're preparing for document. If something remarkable is happening, we need to capture. She stepped back, checking the monitors on her. All systems synchron. When you sleep tonight, we'll record everything your brain acts. The quantum measurement, even your muscles, if you try it again. What if nothing? What if the effect disappears because we're watching? Marcus felt the familiar anxiety tighten his chest. Quantum systems change when observed. What if I'm the system? Then we'll learn. Sarah's confidence felt forced, but Marcus appreciated the effort. Try to sleep naturally. Don't fight it. We need your genuine sleeps, not you trying to perform for the camera. That night, lying in his bed, surrounded by blinking indicator lights and the soft hum of recording, Marcus found sleep. He kept thinking about the equations he didn't remember writing, about the numbers that changed when he closed his eye, about the possibility that his consciousness was divided between two states. What if the sleeping Marcus was the real? What if waking up was the aberration, the noise that disrupted a more fundamental? When sleep finally came, it felt less like rest and more like surrendering to an experiment he didn't fully understand. His last conscious thought was a question that would haunt him through the data they collected that night. What if consciousness wasn't about being awake, but about being willing to stop watching? Sarah watched the monitor the night, her coffee growing cold beside her. The synchronized data stream painted a picture that defied everything she'd learned in 2 decades of science. Marcus's brain activity showed normal sleep progression, deep sleep. Then the telltale rapid eye of REM, but the quantum measurements told a different story entirely. The moment Marcus entered REM sleep, the waveform collapse pattern sharpened dramatically. The probability curves that should have spread across multiple potential states instead snapped into singular outcomes with unsettling precision. It was as if reality itself was making decisions more confident when Marcus's conscious mind. Sarah zoomed in the correlate, her hands trembling slightly as she confirmed what the data. The effect wasn't just present, it was stronger than Marcus had originally documented. Perhaps because he was sleeping more deep, with the security of knowing someone was watching over experiment. But it was the video feed that made her blood run cold. At 3:47 a.m., Marcus's right hand began to move. His eyes remained closed, his breathing steady, but his fingers stretched toward the nightstand where she'd deliberately placed a pen. The movements were fluid, purpose, utterly unlike the jerky motion of typical. His hand found the pen without fumbling, brought it to the paper, and began to. Sarah leaned closer to the screen, her heart hammering. The handwriting was forming equation, complex mathematical expression that flowed across the page in neat, precise rows. She cross-referenced the video timestamp with his EEG reading. Deep REM sleep. His conscious mind was completely offline. Yet, the mathematics being produced was coherent, sophisticated, building on the previous night's work with logical progression. She grabbed her phone and started recording the monitor screen, needing redundant documentation of what. The quantum measurements spiked again, correlating exactly with his writing, as his sleeping hand solved. The experimental apparatus showed wave functions collapse with increased consistency. It was as if the act of solving problems even unconsciously amplified whatever was happening to the quantum. Then Marcus's hand stopped writing. He remained motionless for several seconds before his fingers moved, this time forming letters instead of mathematical symbols. Sarah zoomed in on the video, trying to his writing. The words made her stomach. I am not Mark. She stood up so quickly, her chair fell back. On screen, the hand continued writing, the letters neat and deliberate. I am what observed. I have always been conscious is not. You are watching. Sarah's scientific training with pure primal. This couldn't. Multiple personality. Some kind of dissociative state. But the quantum measurement still showing the elevated, and the mathematics he'd produced earlier was verified as valid, brilliant. Whatever was writing through Marcus's hand understood quantum mechanics at an expert level. The hand wrote one final line, wake him or let me. The choice determines what he become. Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing through implication impossible. If she woke Marcus now, she might interrupt whatever process. But if she let it continue, what was she allowing? Was this truly some kind of alternate consciousness? Or was Marcus's sleeping brain accessing capabilities his waking mind? And most terrifying, what did what he become mean? The quantum measurements were still elevated, still showing that impossible pattern of intensified observation. Marcus's EEG showed deep sleep, his vital signs stable. On the paper, that final message waited. Wake him now, or let me. Sarah reached for the intercom button that would sound an alarm in Marcus, her finger hovering. This was the moment. This was the choice that would define everything. Trust the process and risk Marcus' psychological, or intervene and potentially destroy the most significant discovery in quantum physics. The quantum graph spiked. Wave functions collapsed a sharp, definite state, and Marcus's sleeping hand, as if waiting patiently for her decision, ready to write more truths that shouldn't. Sarah pressed the intercom. The alarm shattered the silence. Marcus jerked, his body convulsing as consciousness slammed back into him like a physical. The electrodes pulled his scalp. The monitors beeped frantically as his heart rate spiked. And for a disorienting moment, he existed in two places at once, in his bed and somewhere else. Somewhere vast and filled with probability that stretched into infinity. Sarah burst through the door, her face pale. Marcus, are you okay? He tried to speak but couldn't find words. His right hand ached. The muscles cramped from use he didn't remember. The pen lay on the nightstand, the paper covered in writing. His writing. He reached for it with trembling, and Sarah didn't stop him. The equations were there, as before, but below them, in his own handwriting, were the words that Sarah had witnessed being, I am not Marcus. I am what you saw there. Marcus's voice came out hoarse. I recorded every. Sarah's laptop was already open, playing back the footage. Marcus watched his sleeping self write fluid certain, watched the words form that he had no memory. The time stamp showed he'd been in deep REM sleep, unconscious, yet clearly, undeniably, something had been conscious. I felt it, Marcus said suddenly, the memory returning in fragment. In the dream, just before you woke, I was seeing everything at once, every possible outcome of every quantum measure, all superimposed, not as chaos, but as clarity. Like my conscious mind is the noise, and sleep removes the filter. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone. What if consciousness isn't what we think it? What if being awake is just one narrow frequency of awareness, and sleep accesses something broader? Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her scientific composure cracking. The quantum measurements supported. While you were writing, the collapse patterns intensified beyond anything, whatever state you were in. It was observing reality more effectively than your waking conscious does. Then observation doesn't require a waking. Marcus felt fundamental shift in his understanding. It requires awareness. But awareness exists on a spectrum. My sleeping mind isn't unconscious. Sits different, less focused, less filtered, more connected to the quantum substrate. Over the following weeks, they refined the experiment. Marcus learned to enter sleep states deliberately, guided by Sarah's monitor. The effect remained consistent when his conscious mind quieted. His capacity to collapse quantum wave intensified. But more remarkably, he began to retain fragments of the experience, brief flashes of seeing probabilities as simultaneous reality, of understanding that observation wasn't about looking, but about existing in the quantum field itself. They published their findings in a preprint survey, carefully worded to avoid sounding. The response was immediate and polar. Some physicists dismissed it as elaborate. Others recognized the consciousness might not be the binary state science had but a spectrum of observational capacity, with sleep representing not absence but transformation. Marcus never fully returns previous way of experiencing reality. Even awake, he sometimes caught glimpses of probability cloud, of future, branch, and collapse. He learned to live between, no longer entirely waking, nor entirely sleep, but something in between. The observer who could see both the particle and the wave. 6 months after the initial discovery, Marcus woke one morning to find new equations in his, not solutions this time, but questions, profound questions about the nature of conscious observation and the role of awareness in quantum. Questions written in his handwriting, but asking things he hadn't thought to ask. Sarah found him staring at the page. More sleeper, more some Marcus. He didn't feel afraid anymore. I think I've been having the wrong conversation. I kept asking what observed my sleep. But the real question is, what part of me is always observing, regardless of whether I'm awake? The quantum measurements continue, still showing the pattern. The effect still intensified during. But now Marcus understood it wasn't an anomaly, it was evidence that consciousness wasn't confined to waking awareness, that observation happened in layers and depth. His species had barely begun to understand. He no longer thought, instead he welcomed, knowing that in dreams he touched something fundamental, something that had been observing reality long before humans invented the concept of consciousness. The universe, it seemed, had never needed witness to exist. It only needed itself, aware in ways that transcended the narrow band of waking. And sometime, in the space between sleep, Marcus wondered if he was the observer or the observed, the scientist or the consciousness studying reality, or reality studying itself, through the lens of a consciousness that finally understood. Observation was never about what. It was about participating in the eternal act of existence, choosing to know itself.